Tomorrow's GDP growth says overall economic growth. Then we have inflation and jobless claims on Thursday. And the big one really is the jobs report for the month of October on Friday. The expectation the number would be impacted by the Boeing strike, also by the hurricanes. I'm bringing Doug Flynn on this from Flynn Zito and start kind of work our way back for Friday. And the other ones, which is kind of a larger discussion, sure. But it will be impacted probably, right? Especially by the hurricanes or by the strike. And then, you know, I would assume Trump's side's going to come out and say, oh, look at these job growth numbers. They're terrible. The Harris,
that's right.
They might come out and say, oh, the unemployment rate went down. So it's funny when you get this stuff right before an election. Yeah,
and they'll both be cherry picking the best numbers out of this that are possibly impacted by the hurricane and the Boeing strike as an example. But and they both won't necessarily be wrong. They just probably won't have the full disclosure on how much of it was impacted by the hurricane. A quick example of that is wages. You know, like in the hurricanes, when a lot of part-time employees can't work, they're the lower paid workers typically. So the numbers are just based on what were the earnings. And so if you have all the full-time people still kind of holding on to their jobs, you could have a spike in wage numbers in terms of average hourly wages. It could look really, really good, but it's skewed by the fact that all the part-timers weren't working. So all of these numbers here, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday, right before the election, you know, they'll both tout them, but you're most likely better off just saying it's probably not the full and truest picture of how things are in a normal situation.
And to that point, inflation data, which as it said there comes out on Thursday, is probably the most important political conversation that we're having around in the economy, right? That's the number one issue in a lot of the polls. Some people just say economy, but if you ask them specifically, inflation, see the consumer price index and how, you know, things have eased up. Prices aren't going up at the rate that they were. But I would think people's opinions of this are pretty much baked in at this point, right? That they're not going to be looking at a number and say, you know what, oh, look at that. Now I'll go for Harris, that type of thing.
No, look, you're going to get a really good number here. You can get a number really close to the 2% target, really low twos, wow. which is dynamite. I think you could really possibly get that. And that's also going to be skewed with some of the hurricane impact. But the real issue isn't even so much the unemployment number and you know how many people are going to take that into the voting booth with them. It's the consumer sentiment numbers are still so negative and they remain negative. So even in light of all this good news, that's what's weighing on everybody. And I think that's what they do carry in. So I don't know how much of an impact it carries right into walking there and casting that final vote. I don't think people are going to change it because the rate went from 2.4 to 2.2.
No, probably not. But that sentiment number's a lot like when we talk in politics about wrong track, right track, and that type of thing. But that's how that's sort of the same thing in business or in economics is how we measure it and what regular people think. Again, that disconnect has been a big story, not just recently, but for years. Your most recent view on that is what? About why the perception hasn't improved?
I honestly think it has to do with the cumulative effect of inflation and the fact that not even just the touted numbers of 20-something% in the current administration. It's the fact that, you know, homeowners and auto insurance and things like that are up 50%. And don't kid yourself, after the hurricane, all those states that were impacted, those insurance rates are going to continue to go up by a large degree, no matter which president is in office, because that's how insurance companies work. They have a bad impact. They're going to raise your rates in all those areas that got affected. So a lot of those states that were affected are going to have more of an impact. And yeah, they kick up to the national numbers. But I think that's really what it is. Yeah. We have these periods and in certain areas and certain food items and things that we carry with us. We remember what they were a couple years ago, even though the inflation rate is lower and low, and they're doing a great job at that. It's just that weight is what people are carrying.
Let me make one more point on this. I think it's actually important because a lot of people say, well, what's the election? What's the impact going to be? The economy and the markets and everything else. Unlike Steve Bannon, who apparently it's more than just a podcast, Doug and I have a podcast that, trust me, is just a podcast. It's called No Dumb Questions. You should look it up, right? But the last episode we did was about that, right? It's like people get so worked up about this election for good reason in many cases. But you were saying there that the market's probably not one of them. It's done pretty well no matter who the heck's president.
Yeah, the markets don't care about elections. People do. And if you strip that out, it's about the underlying companies of the market and how well they're going to execute. And around the edges, you might have different sectors and areas that alter a little bit. But good, solid companies that do a really good job of running their businesses it isn't going to change the long-term aspect. And that's what you've seen, regardless of who's in power. There's some benefits to having, the opposite side in power in Congress versus what's at the president. You get that sort of that offsetting government, which works really well. But generally, the numbers are very, very slight in terms of the difference. And so, toss that to the side when it comes to your investing. Obviously, people have a vested interest in it for other reasons. But from an investment perspective, those short-term things are just trades you don't really want to mess around with, especially right before the election. Think longer term. That's what investing is all about anyway.
It's an ironic name for a podcast, by the way, No Dumb Questions, which is what I spend 3 times a week. I'm asking them to Doug. Thank you, sir. Doug Flynn, right there.